Opening up Blender, or any 3D software for that matter, can feel like stepping into the cockpit of a commercial airliner. There are a lot of buttons and switches that do a lot of different things. An animator makes use of what he or she can create visually, but also understands the basic math and technical elements running under the hood. The 3D viewport is the only true visual part of the interface. Working in 3D space can be disorienting at first, but once you understand how the basic controls work, you'll be able to efficiently and comfortably navigate your way around objects in your scene, whether it's a simple room, a city block, or an entire planet. But first, let's start out by selecting our cube. Selecting objects. Selecting an object is as simple as left-clicking it within the viewport. To deselect an object, left-click anywhere you see empty space. This is fairly straightforward for an object like a cube, but it gets a little more complicated selecting certain types of objects once we start getting into the different modes, but we'll discuss that in a future lesson. Notable hotkeys are A to select all, or Option or Alt plus A to deselect all. Now, as I mentioned in the last lesson, the main forms of navigation within the 3D viewport are pan, rotate, and zoom. To recap, within the main viewport, hold Option or Alt and left-click drag to rotate or orbit around the cube. Hold Option or Alt and middle mouse drag to pan around. And lastly, hold Option or Alt and right-click drag to zoom in and out. Viewport Gizmo. You can also perform these same navigation maneuvers using the Viewport Gizmo. When hovered over the gizmo, you should see a highlighted circle. Simply left-click and drag anywhere in the blank gray area to rotate your view. Below the viewport gizmo are the Move and Zoom buttons. When hovered over the Move icon, left-click and drag to pan around. And you can do the same for the Zoom icon to zoom in and out. Orbit Center. An important observation about how navigation works in Blender is where the center point is when we are orbiting around an object or zooming in. How does Blender determine where this central point is? If you go into Edit, Preferences, Navigation, you will see the option for Orbit Around Selection checked on by default. This means that the center of whatever object is currently selected is the center point in which we will rotate around and zoom towards or away from. If nothing is selected, the center point is the location of the last object selected, or the origin point of a brand new Blender file. Now below these buttons is the camera view toggle, which will snap your view to what your active camera is seeing. To change the active camera, select a different camera, then use View, Cameras, Set Active Object as Camera. And now you can see we've switched which camera we're looking through in the viewport. We can also toggle between active cameras using the icons in the outliner. The last button in this group is the perspective toggle. This will switch between perspective projection, which is how the human eye or camera lens sees the world, and orthographic projection, which helps display three-dimensional objects using a two-dimensional view. Another way to quickly switch to an orthographic view of the top, bottom, front, back, left, and right sides of your scene is to use the axis buttons on the viewport gizmo. This allows us to quickly switch directions, giving us more flexibility when working with 3D objects. To go back to a perspective view, simply left-click and drag in the empty space of the gizmo. Note that this type of view is not meant to be rendered, but simply to make your life easier as you are working on things like sculpting, lighting, or animating. Unless of course you are going for an isometric look, which should be done through the camera settings instead. Quad view. This type of flexibility, to switch back and forth from perspective to orthographic so seamlessly, is a unique solution to the quad view that has been typically used in most other 3D platforms. To enable the quad view, go to View, Area, Toggle Quad View, or hit Tab for some, and Control plus Alt Option plus Q for others. Some prefer to see multiple orthographic views at once. Others are fine switching between them in a single window. Numpad. If you're looking to make more uniform movements when working, the number pad is incredibly useful if your keyboard has one. You can zoom using the plus and minus keys. Rotate uniformly using the 8, 4, 2, and 6 keys. Make small pan movements using the 8, 4, 2, and 6 keys while holding Command or Control. Switch between perspective and orthographic using 5. And switch to preset orthographic views using 7, 1, and 3 while holding Command or Control. View options. So in addition to all these different methods of navigating the viewport, there are also some more useful commands found within the view options. Frame selected will center up every object you have selected in the viewport. You can also do this by pressing the period key. Frame all will center out every single type of object in your scene, regardless of whether or not they are selected. You can also do this by pressing the home key. Now we also have a function called Toggle Local View. With an object selected, we can enable and disable this functionality by pressing the / key. What this does is isolate that selected object from everything else in your scene. Useful if you've created a complex world with a lot of different objects in it, and you just want to solo in on something without everything else obscuring your view. 3D Cursor. The last element of viewport navigation I want to cover is the 3D cursor. This is essentially a null object that you can use as a pivot point in a variety of situations. To move this cursor around, I first need to select the 3D cursor button. Then left-click anywhere in my viewport. Now this isn't a very accurate way of moving the 3D cursor around in space, so if I hit the N key and go to the View tab, I can put in exact coordinates for position, as well as degrees of rotation. To return this cursor to the origin, or 0, 0, 0 in X, Y, and Z, you can press Shift plus C. And to hide the 3D cursor, you can uncheck it in the Overlays menu. Just to give you an example of what this can do, first I'm going to select my cube, then change my Transform Pivot Point settings to 3D Cursor. Now when I try to scale or rotate the cube, I am doing so from the origin of the 3D cursor and not the center point of the cube. If you hit Shift plus S, you will toggle a pie menu that describes some of the functionalities that are tied to the 3D cursor. For example, with the cube selected, within this pie menu I can select Cursor to Selected. This will now snap the 3D cursor to the center point of the object I have selected, which in this case is the cube. We'll be discussing more uses of the 3D cursor in future lessons, but for now I wanted you to be familiar with it so you know what this random object is when you open up a new Blender file. Space Mouse. Aside from your mouse, keyboard, and Wacom tablet, I wanted to briefly touch on another piece of peripheral hardware, the Space Mouse. This provides a much different method of interacting with 3D space, but may end up being something that you prefer over the more traditional tools. Now, getting comfortable with the Space Mouse requires a decent amount of practice, because within this single joystick, there are many different ways you can navigate within a viewport. For example, if I push ever so slightly on the left and right of the joystick, I can pan left or right. I can also do the same by pushing forward or pulling back. However, if I include tilt in that, I can tilt either down or tilt up. And so the controls are very delicate if you simply want to move forward, back, left, or right, without either rotating in that direction or doing some sort of tilt. Now moving around, you'll also notice this blue dot appearing, and this is appearing on the actual geometry itself, kind of like a laser extending out from the space mouse and giving us a master focal point. So if I just do a twist motion here with the space mouse, you can see how we're orbiting around that blue point. And so application-wise, while the space mouse might not be suited for something like animation, it can be useful when, say, having the space mouse in your left hand, and working on modeling or texturing using a Wacom tablet or a mouse with the right hand. And so this tool really comes down to preference. Some find it a little bit too weird, and others, when they finally get used to it, can't imagine their workflow without it. It's one thing to move around an empty viewport with a cube or two, but how about something more substantial, like a house? Your assignment is to practice using the navigation methods discussed in this lesson with a new project with a simple cube, as well as using this house model. The goal here is to get you used to working in 3D space, so you can be more efficient with future assignments. You can find the house.blend file below this lesson. It's going to take a bit of time for you to get used to working in the 3D viewport. Something I guarantee will become secondhand to you after some practice, but definitely weird when first starting out. See you in the next lesson.